This morning's meeting is on using shortcut menus in Access applications. I am Dale Fye. I'm the owner of Developing Solutions LLC. I was a Microsoft Access MVP from 2013 through 2016, and that's my website up there on the screen. The history. Discussing shortcut menus back before we had Windows. Obviously, we had command line prompts and those types of things. But one of the integral parts of Windows applications has always been the right-click menu. Everybody kind of expects to use that menu in a variety of locations in whatever Windows application they use. And because of that, I used them extensively in the early 2000s, or in the 1900s and 2000s. But then in 2007, Microsoft, for some unknown reason, deprecated that feature that allowed us to customize menus. My guess is that it had to do with the ribbon control and the move from command bar menus that you could display across the top or bottom or side of your screen, and they got rid of those, but they left the shortcut menus. But they deprecated the method that was used to create shortcut menus. So it became much more difficult. You had to write custom code. And because of that, I've seen a lot of people stop using shortcut menus or reduce the amount of use of shortcut menus in their Access applications. So what I did when I was at one of the Access MVP Summit meetings, a couple of the guys there and I started talking about the need to have this feature. We asked Microsoft if they were going to reinitiate it. They gave us, at the time, a big shrug and kind of implied that they had no intention of creating a new method to create shortcut menus. So a couple of us were talking, and I said, if I spent some time working on this, you think it would be applicable? And the answer was yes. So I started digging into the command bar object model and started doing some development work on creating what became the Access shortcut tool. So right now there are it's close to 200 shortcut menus or command bar menus in Access. Not all of those are shortcut menus, but a large number of them are. And to find out how many there are on any given version of Access that you're running, you can use a simple command bar. Oops, back up. Let me page that up. You can use a simple command, print application.commandbars.count. That'll tell you how many there are. And if you want to see what their names are, you can print them out using a for each loop, or you can embed that into some code and write that information to a table, whatever you want to do. And then if you have a specific command bar that you want to look at more deeply, you can use the code here at the bottom of the line of the screen to actually iterate through the controls in the command bar and print out the control caption and its ID value. That simple loop works to a point, but if the control is a pop-up menu of its own, if it's a drill down, basically, you won't see that unless you add another loop in there and drill down on those types of controls. So there are a variety of different ways to show a pop-up menu. The easiest way is in the immediate window. You can just type a command that says, Commandbars with the name of the menu and .show pop-up, and that'll display the menu. But pop-up menus are context sensitive, or shortcut menus are context sensitive. So as you can see in the top image here, I was in the immediate window, and the only feature that menu gave me that I could perform at that particular time in the shortcut in the immediate window was the copy feature. The actual list of controls in that particular command bar are shown in the list below on the bottom side. Now, I don't have any idea what reconvert and Hangul Hanja conversion are. I'm assuming the Hangul Hanja conversion does something if you're running the Chinese version of Access, but I do not know for sure. But you'll see that all those others are available there. Not all of them are even visible in the top part. So in the context-sensitive aspect of a command bar, you'll note that some controls are not visible, and some of them are simply disabled. So how do you create your own shortcut menus? Well, the first thing I do when creating a shortcut menu, or at least first thing I did, was I would add the Microsoft Office XX object library to my application. It looks like, Liesel's audio is not working. Liesel, you might want to try exiting and then coming back into the conference. At any rate, so once you have the object library linked to your reference in your application, then you can declare the variables using the various declarations. And what I generally do is eventually I will remove that early binding and execute late binding, in which case all of these declarations become dim cbar as object and dim cbar button as button, that type of thing. And then you start out by defining the command bar. So you give it a name. The position is not what I would have thought, what I thought it would be initially when I started dealing with this. It doesn't have anything to do with where it shows up. It was originally, I found that it was originally designed for the position that the menu bar, that the bar would show up on the screen, at the top of the screen, on the side, or the bottom of the screen. But that doesn't apply to shortcut menus. Shortcut menus have to be a position number 5. Hello? And then menu bar. Then the menu bar issue is just whether it's a menu or a shortcut. In this case, the default is false, and that's what we want to leave it as, because we're not creating a menu bar, we're creating a shortcut menu. And then temporary defines whether or not you're creating this menu to temporarily exist within your current Access application, or whether if you set it to true, it will be there during the current session, but as soon as you close Access, that menu bar will go, or command bar will go away. If you set it to true, then that command bar will stay there permanently in that application. I was, for the longest time, I was creating these things during startup every time I opened an application, and then I realized I didn't have to do that. I could create them as permanent and I would just leave that code out as a module within the application so that I could rerun it, or I could modify that particular command bar if I needed to. But I would set the temporary to false so that the command bar would persist within that application. Anybody have any questions so far? Okay, so the next step is to, once you've defined the command bar itself, is to start defining the controls that go within the command bar. Now, each one of the items listed in the shortcut menu is defined as a control, just like if it was a control on your form. They have a number of different types. They have buttons. There are text boxes, and the control for the type for that is edit. There are drop downs, so you can create your own drop down menus in your control shortcut menu, and there are pop-ups, which allows you to drill down to another level of controls underneath a pop-up. The ID value is there to refer to existing built-in controls. So if you know what the ID value of an existing built-in control is, you can use it. Unfortunately, it's not easy to find that information. Actually, it's not published anywhere that I was able to find. I basically had to write some code to iterate through all of the command bars and then all of the controls within each of those command bars in order to capture that information for my purposes. But if you have that ID value, you can use one of the built-in controls that Access uses, and it'll come with its picture, and it'll have the same functionality that is built into that Access application, and you won't have to define a function for that. The parameter argument is there so that you can, if you want to provide a specific parameter that will be processed by your code, that when you click on that item, you can enter it here. An example for that might be if you're creating a control that runs a specific report and you want to pass a report name in, but you're going to use the same function to process many reports, then you might want to pass in the parameter of the report name. Or you can use it to pass in any parameter you want. The before argument just is basically telling Access where you want this control within the list of controls in that menu. So if you say before item is 1, then it's going to put it at the top of the stack. The downside is that you may not, at the time you're creating this, you may not know how many items there are in the stack, and if you give it a before value of 10 and there's only 8 items in the stack, then it's going to raise an error when you run this. By default, I just leave that blank, and it will put it at the bottom of the stack of controls in that particular command bar. And then again, you can identify whether this control is temporary or permanent by setting the value of the temp argument. I generally create my controls as permanent, so temp is equal to false. But if I'm adding a control to an existing built-in Access shortcut menu, I'll generally do so do it temporarily, and then in that case, I will do it during like my application startup process. I'll add those controls during the splash screen load or something like that, so that they all get built when the application loads, but then they go away during the application is running. And then I showed you, and then on the right-hand side, there's just a little bit of code here that describes how I would, how one of my shortcut menus is defined. or the control on one of my shortcut menus is defined. I declare it as type 1, which is a button. It's temporary is true in this case. I gave it a caption of print. The on action property of the control is the function or procedure that I want to call when I click on that button in the shortcut menu. The face ID is the image that I want to use. There are a huge number of face IDs that are available to use in Access. You can use IDs that are in Access or Excel. I mean, basically they're available for all of the Office apps. You can find them online, but it's a huge list. And finding the specific one you want is a challenge because there's no way to look them up by, a description of the image itself. You just have to browse through the lists. What I've done is I've gone through and categorized or cataloged a bunch of the IDs that are related to Access, Excel, Word, PowerPoint, and I've built them into my Access shortcut tool so that I can browse through those and select one. Or you can actually scroll through a list of thousands of them as well in my tool. But begin group are visible and enabled are obvious. They indicate whether the control is visible or enabled when at startup. Begin group just indicates whether or not it'll draw a line above it before that particular control exists. The tooltip text is self-explanatory. Width I don't use very often. I really have not gotten a good grasp on why I need the width, except for in the case of drop-down and text box type controls. And that kind of goes to the comment Giorgio had in the conversation. He asked, what's a control edit? That's a text box. So you can actually enter, type in text into the control. And then when you hit enter, whatever function you have that you're processing will use that text in whatever way, shape, or form that you desire. Control property. Other control properties that are available. I mean, these is a better description of those properties that were in that one that I just discussed. So I won't go into too much detail here. But the one that I didn't discuss before is state. And state basically will tell you whether that control is checked or unchecked. So in some applications, what you'll find is you might have a list of options that you want your user to be able to select, and you basically want them to be able to check that as yes or no. And one method to do that is a shortcut menu. You can store those values, and then you can refer back to the value of the state property of that control to process that information when you need it. So that's just a way that you can set the state, and that has to be done. Interestingly, on a button control, it doesn't toggle that automatically. You actually have to physically code that in the function that you or the procedure that you use when you click it. So using built-in command bars. Let's back up just a second. Does anybody have any questions up? Let's see. We've got Giorgio asked, how do you run the function associated with the control edit? If you start typing in a text box control in a shortcut menu, and then you hit enter, it's going to automatically process. Let me go back to the previous. It's going to process the function that or the procedure that you used in your on-action property of the control. Now, I probably ought to mention at this point that there are a number of different syntaxes that you can use for the onAction property. If you're calling a function, the easiest and most reliable is to encapsulate the function name along with the equal sign and the parentheses that go with it in quotes. You can actually pass values to that function, not only through the parameter property that we talked about on the previous form or previous page, but inside the parentheses here, if your function calls for parameters, you can embed those parameters inside the quotes here, or inside the parentheses here, just like you would in a function call in your code. Although if you're passing a string, you would obviously surround it with either double quotes or single quotes. So that's just an interesting point on that. You can, there's a number of different ways that you can refer to the procedure. If you're running a subroutine rather than a function, you just list the subroutine name, or you can also refer to the actual module name that it's in, with a period followed by the name of the actual function, if you want to be specific as to what module that's in. Which is helpful because if you have, for example, if you have function report print listed several places in your application, first off, it's not going to compile because you're going to have that duplicate declaration. But if you do have it listed more than one place, when you run the pop-up and click on it, it won't run either of those because it doesn't know which one to run, so it won't run either of them. If you declare an onAction function or a procedure that doesn't exist in the application, you may or may not get a warning message. I've encountered both, where if it doesn't see it, it just doesn't do anything. In other cases, I have seen error messages pop up that it couldn't find that report or that function or procedure name. So that's just a point of interest. Let's see here. Giorgio asks, can I give a demo? Yeah, I can do that in just a minute, Giorgio. We'll get to that here shortly. I'll do that when I use the shortcut tool. Next. Okay, so using built-in command bars. I frequently disable them when I'm using forms and reports. The built-in ones, I've been really lucky. I've been worked with a lot of clients who everybody seems to have Office Pro on their computer, and nobody's running runtime apps. So I have actually never had a client or had to deploy a runtime application for anybody. So that's been pretty unique. The downside of that is that if you leave the built-in command bars enabled on, or shortcut menus enabled on forms and reports, then they're going to get a bunch of options that include things like design view and other issues that you really don't want them to have during the development phase. So you can turn off the shortcut menu bars on the forms and on any other control for that matter. So you can basically just at the form level you turn off the shortcut menus, and then they're not available for any other controls on the form. Likewise for reports. The downside of that is that if you turn off the controls for the shortcut menus for the reports, then you lose some of the other functionality that you want. You might want to be able to send that report as an attachment, or save it as a PDF file, or print it, or close it. So if you turn off shortcut menus, then and don't provide an alternative, then your users lose functionality. So what I will generally do is I'll disable the built-in command bars, and I'll create my own command or shortcut menus for reports and forms, so that the clients don't have the full selection of items that are available. Let's see here. Looking to see if there's any other questions. No other questions so far. So sometimes it's difficult to determine what command bar you're looking at. So sometimes you will want to modify an existing command bar. You might want to add, for example, on a data sheet, you might want to add an option to do some feature. So what I'm going to do now is, real quickly, I'm going to switch over to Access, and I'm going to, let's see here, I got to go back here. I'm going to change my screen. Okay, oops. Present. Okay, my screen went blank. Okay, so is everybody seeing Access now? I popped up I'm just going to pop up the Access shortcut tool real quick here. And I'm going to add a control to one of the data sheet row. Actually, it looks like I've already done it here. So what I did was I added a Hello World button at the bottom of the table design data sheet row control. And I'm just going to minimize that, and I'm going to go to this table, open it up, and if I click on that row and right click, you'll see that there's a Hello World button here. And the function I have just does the basic Hello World, pop-up message box. But you'll also see what I was talking about on the right-hand side was it's hard to determine what command bar you're looking at. I would have had no idea what command that allows me to add a bottom of every command bar shortcut menu. And it's this little "what's this menu" option. Oh, that's interesting. And when I clicked on it, it didn't run, of course. Susan, didn't you talk about this yesterday, in our discussion yesterday? Let's see what we got here. Let's look at the code that goes with that. Shortcut menu. This may be an instance of what's running here. So what's this menu? So let's see if we've got more than one what's this menu. Okay, what's this menu? There's a TFCT. What's this menu here? I've got two different versions of that. So what I need to do is I need to disable one. And I'll disable this. And now we'll go back over here and hopefully it will work the way we designed it. Yeah, still didn't work. Okay, so I must have another set of code in there But the what's this menu functionality, if you add it to your application during design time, will help you to identify what menu is run. I'm not going to spend the time to do that during the discussion here, but I do have a copy of that app out on my website, which is referenced at as the last slide in the slide deck, and it's in my blog, and you can download that code from there if you so desire. I have some warnings for you with regard to using. Let me reposition the focus back to the other desktop. Have some warnings for you with regard to manipulating the built-in command bars in your applications. First off, be very careful, because when you manipulate the built-in command bars, if you change their enabled property or change their visible property, you do that for all of your Access applications, or for all of your Access, development environment. So if you're going to do something with regard to manipulating the built-in command bars, I advise extreme caution. If you're going to add records or if you're going to add controls, I strongly recommend that you do make them temporary, so that as soon as that Access session expires, those controls will go away. If you do that, obviously you're going to have to add those controls in every time you run the application. So you'll need to write some code that creates those for you and does that functionality for you. But the Access Shortcut tool will help with that as well. Runtime shortcut menus. Okay, like I said, I've been really lucky. I haven't had to field any runtime Access apps. All of the built-in menus are disabled when you create a runtime app, or we just distribute it as a runtime. However, you can copy and reuse the built-in menus in your application. The downside is that you'll have to go through, and on every form you'll have to define which form level command bars you want to work. On every shortcut you'll have to define, on every text box you'll have to define the shortcut menus you want on that individual text box. The easiest way I've found to do that is just go through the form, select all of the controls, and then in the shortcut menu property, I'll indicate what I want it to use, and that does work. So don't be afraid to use shortcut menus in your runtime apps. It just means that you have to do a little bit more work. Okay, so the Access Shortcut tool, like I said, this came up during a discussion at an MVP conference, and so I spent over a year working with one of the other MVPs, doing developing and testing to come up with the variety of options that exist here. So let me swing back over. I'm going to go back over to, actually I think I'm just going to drag Access over here to this screen for now, and we'll pull the shortcut tool back up again. It shows up, it's an add-in, so it shows up in the Database Tools add-ins menu once you've installed it, and it's a pop-up, so it will drag from one form to another. So you can have it open while you're doing development in one, form development on one side, and drag it to another form or whatever. But so these are let's remove the filter, and you'll see that in this particular case it's showing 212 command bars listed in the in Access, this version of Access. Some of those are pop-ups or they're shortcut menus. Some of them are not. But the pop-up defines those that are shortcut menus. I've got it filtered so that I can just filter on the ones that I created, or you can filter on a number of other issues too. You can look for example, if you're just interested in datasheet shortcut menus, you can type datasheet and filter on all the menus that use the datasheet name. You can also, if you're looking for a specific control, for example, you've found a specific control and you want to filter on, I don't know why, let's do this, remove the filters. You want to look for all of the command bars that use the undo command. Oops, that didn't work, undo. You got to spell it right first though. So these are all the command bars where one of the captions over here somewhere is undo. So that might be useful if you're trying to figure out what the ID value is for undo. I have to scroll through here. And unfortunately, you can't really use equals there because what I've done here is if it's a pop-up menu, if it's a drill down menu, you'll see that there are hyphens in front of the name of the controls, so that that you can tell that it's drill down. In this case, it drills down at a couple of different levels, and if you want to see those, let's see, this is menu bar. Menu bar is not a good one because it doesn't work, but let's use this one as an example. So you can see how they are indented here. And like, for example, this one's got a add to group, and then it's got a custom group list, which goes back to the point of this thing being shortcut menus being context sensitive. So there is code in the background for these built-in menus that, based on the circumstance that you're using this command bar in, it will fill in these values, or it may just hide that whole thing. If you want to look at what this menu looks like with all of its controls enabled, you can preview it and you can see all the various options. You can drill down and see what the drill downs look like, etc. So that's just a way you can do that. Okay, going back to Giorgio's comment. Giorgio wanted to know how we would use a text. Let's let me look over here at some of these other questions too. Which ones are built in? Okay, Giorgio's question is, how do you know which one's built in? And there is a built-in property, obviously, interestingly enough, of the command bar. So or of the controls in the command bar. So if you iterate through the command bar controls, one of the properties is built in. So you can determine that. In the application here, it is obviously displayed as a checkbox, as I have displayed the visible enabled in the begin group as well. So let's go ahead and we're just going to play with one of my built-in command bars. Here's a test one. I had a client who was having a problem with this filter excluding the selection button. This is a built-in, this is a office level function that's already built into Access, but she could not get it ever to get enabled on her application, and I added it to here just to test to see whether I was able to, and it didn't do anything I was unable to get it to display as enabled in any of my tests either. She also indicated that she tried to, and the reason I mentioned the undo command a few minutes ago was there are like 4 different ID values for the undo command in Access, which means they all have different functionality in various menus, and there's no documentation to describe what each one does. So you kind of have to play with it if you're going to use the built-in command bars or the built-in controls when you're doing stuff. So frequently I'll just create a new control that does what I want, that has a function associated with it, so I know exactly what it's going to do in my applications. In this case, let's try and create a text box like Georgia had asked. So when you click on add control to command bar, it lets you choose whether you want a custom one or whether you want an office one. If you want an office one, it lists all of those controls that I mentioned before that I've gone through and identified. For example, there's 2 different controls in Access for average. There's 2 for bottom or bottom left that describe a variety of different things. Look at all the different close options you have available to you. Each of these may or may not have an image associated with them. So in this case, this one's got like a file folder that close. This one has an X, so that might be like a form close. This is another one that might be a form close. And this one looks kind of like a tab, I'm not sure. But so that's why I said you have to be careful when you're using the built-in Office ones. But there are some that are very helpful. Like I like to use the print button because I know how it's going to function in pretty much all cases, etc. But we're going to create a custom button, and we're just going to call it text box. And excuse me. And I've actually, instead of using the term control edit, I've actually, changed those so that they're kind of obvious what they are. I'll enter something here for the text box. I don't want this to be temporary since this is a test menu and it's in a non-operational database. I'm not going to worry about that. And I'm not going to begin a group, but I do want it to be, I'm going to put it before the filter and excluding selection. This basically accomplishes the feature of that before parameter. So this will say, oh, make it number 1 when I do this. And then I'm going to do on action is equal to and then I can just hit finish. And when you do that, it's going to tell you that it doesn't recognize my text box test as an existing function or a procedure in your database, and that's just fine. It's just a reminder that you have to add that function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that, and we will minimize that form. We'll pop up the S, and we'll create a new function. And just to start with, this is one of those things I'm going to actually have to look this up because I don't use these. I very rarely use these. But let's see here. So did I close that or did I minimized it? Let's maximize that again. Let's see. We're in the test shortcut menu. So now if I pull up a form, pull up a design view, I'm just going to change this shortcut menu associated with that to the test function, or shortcut menu, excuse me. Open that. And on this control, when I right click, oops, wait a second, what happened? It didn't show up. So let's go back to our menu here. Make sure we got everything saved. We can edit that control. Text box, visible. Next. My text box test. Finish. Okay, so that's very interesting. All right, I'm going to have to play with that one, Giorgio, figure out what's going on with that, and I'll get back to you. I don't know why that one didn't work. But let's try it. Let's try a different. Let's try another one here, just so. Let's create let's create a pop-up. So we'll drill down on something here. Enable it. We'll put it at the bottom. Or at the bottom. Finish. Okay, so here's our drill down. Now I'm gonna, since this is gonna be a drill down, I'm gonna add another one here. I'm just gonna add hello world into this one again. Okay, so now if I preview that, see, there's my text box in the preview mode. So why it wasn't showing up in the actual report, I do not know. But drill down gives me the hello world. So now if we minimize this again, come in here, I've got the drill down, but I don't have the text box for some reason. So I'll have to figure out, I'll have to look into that, Giorgio, and figure out why that is. I know I've used them in a couple of instances and they've worked, but I'll have to test it here. Okay, let's see here. Other issues with the shortcut tool. Let me pull it back up again. So you can, once you've got your shortcut menu built, you can move controls up and down. So if I want to move the filter and exclude back up to the top, I can do that using these. I can edit the controls. I can copy a control. Now this is one of the things we talked about. If we go back to show all command bars, for example, if you want to do if you want to replicate a data sheet functionality, uh-oh. Oh no. Okay. Gonna have to come back into this. So if you want to implement a data sheet in a runtime version, you might want to actually, since you can't use the built-in controls, I'm going to reboot Access here real quick. Since you can't use the built-in controls, you actually have to copy the controls. And I'll drag this over here and initiate the shortcut tool again. And it will go through that process. While it's doing that, we can talk about this. That's a little annoying, isn't it? So you might want to copy it. So you can copy, you can select the item from the shortcut menu, from the command bar menu, click on the copy button, and it will just ask you if you want to rename that, which means it'll bring the command bar and all of its controls over into a new So we're going to look at this one, and we'll just do a copy here real quick. And we'll give it a new name, Dale's datasheet cell. It's going to be a pop-up. I'm going to make it temporary because I don't want to keep it here in this database after I close. Okay, and then one of the interesting things I found about the command bars is that they don't have a set of indices in the or indexes values in the database. Some of them are set, but the ones towards the bottom of the list, there's some gaps in there. So when you add a new command bar or insert one, it may not be consecutive. See, for example, the one I just inserted, it gave it a index value of 218 with a couple of others which are built-in ones which are lower on the cell than it. So I had to basically, whenever you create a new command bar, it goes through that process of looking for all of them, through all of them again, and then adding that one in that you just did. But you'll see that all of those controls that were in the original are over here now. So if, for example, I wanted to do a report menu, and the easiest way to do that is just to copy the report menu and then come over here and say, okay, well, I don't want the design view, and I don't want this, and I don't want that. So I'll just go ahead and delete those from my control set so that they only see those items that I want them to see. The other thing that you can do is you can import, and I'm not going to do that here because it pops up another window and etc. and we're running low on time. But you can actually import command bars that you've created in other apps from here. Now you can also do that feature theoretically using the external data button. There's an option when you run that in the options section, which isn't visible by default. But if you expand the options on your import feature, there's an option, a checkbox that says import menus and command bars and menus, and you can check that, and it will import all of those for you. The difference here is that if I do import here, I can select a specific command bar that I created that I want to import, and what it will do is if I tell it to, it will copy the code, the custom code that's in that other application that's associated with that command bar into your new application. So that's a real Benny with regard to custom ones that you've created yourself. You can also go through in here and you can rename command bars. So if you don't like Data's datasheet cell, you can do that. Like I mentioned before, you can preview what's in the command bar. Sometimes it's not legible. Sometimes it's blank. You can't see what's down there before. And here's one, for example, that looks like it's a date filter. And then here's another. It goes even deeper. So sometimes they're illegible when you look at them from this perspective. So those on the built-in side. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to minimize that. Go back to my presentation, and basically, I'm going to wrap this up. So I've got a couple of articles. As I was developing this app, I wrote a whole bunch of articles in Experts Exchange, and that's what the first 4 articles listed on this page show. And then the Access Shortcut tool was my ultimate goal, and that's what I built. The tool itself is free. There is a pop-up donation that will show up every 10 or 15 times you run the application until you've donated. So if you're not annoyed by a little pop-up message that says ignore, then the application is free to use. And I hope you like it and hope you use it. Does anybody have? Let's see, Giorgio. Let's see. Giorgio says, "Why can't you use built-ins in a data sheet?" you can use built-ins in a data sheet, but you can't use any built-ins in a runtime app. So that's why I was saying if you wanted to copy one of the data sheet command bars, you would select those command bars that you want to copy them over with your own name and give it a name of your own, and then you could use those in your application. There are some difficulties with working with data sheets in a runtime environment and shortcut menus, because depending on what row whether you've selected a row or a single row or multiple rows, a column or multiple columns, or a cell in your data sheet, the functionality that you get will be different. So I would encourage you to read the using shortcut menus in Access Runtime article, because it talks a little bit more about that and shows you how I do some tests. And in the Runtime app, you actually have to use like a mouse down or mouse up event to trap whether the status of the form when you use the click in order to get the right to use the right shortcut menu. So it can be a challenge to do that aspect of things in a runtime environment. And your comment is, yes, there are a few command bars that don't have names. Interestingly enough, if we go back over here and pop up, if we pop up form numbers, when you right click on the top bar, on the title bar of the form, that command bar doesn't have a title. It does have a number though, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to disable it really quickly if we can. And that index number is shown on the in the Access Shortcut tool. Okay, there we go. So if you disable that, notice when I right-click on the top of the form on that title bar, that is no longer visible. That shortcut menu is no longer visible. But the one for the form header section is. So you could disable that form header section as well. So that would be another way that you could, rather than using the built-in methodology of just changing the property of the form to not allow shortcut menus, you could use a set of commands in the form open event which disables some of those menus, and that goes back, like I said before, the challenge is that if you do that, you must remember to re-enable those, because that status will persist within Access, not within that particular database, but within Access when you're working with the built-in menus, command bar menus. So, does anybody have any questions? Yeah, Giorgio says, what are the links? Susan, is there a way for me to upload this briefing deck to the group site?
Yes, you could, if you provide this to me at the end of the meeting, and I will get Alex to include this on the website. Okay.
Then I'll just post that out on the website, Giorgio, so that you can see that. But if you're interested in experts, I mean, if you go to expertsexchange.com and do a search on Commandbars, my article, and then restrict that to articles, mine will show up there. I don't think there's any others out there. Anybody have any other questions? Welcome, Greg. When did you join us?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. I was here at the very start.
Oh, okay. I guess there was a couple that I saw down at the bottom that may have dialed in. It looks like there's a couple other dial-ins as well that I don't see on my screen. So I'm glad you joined us. Where did you hear about it? So did you hear about it on LinkedIn or some other method?
No, on the AccessUserGroups.org. I was actually at the last meeting.
Oh, great. Good. All right. Does anybody have any other questions? All right. Thank you very much for attending. And Susan, if you can.